and we have representatives and experts on our panel that can speak to that. It speaks to principles and behaviors and a culture. And again, we have representation for that. It speaks to content. It speaks to customers. So it's a broad topic. But what I was hearing coming very strongly through from Dion's overarching presentation earlier on is that unless it's owned and sponsored at a high level within the organization, progress is very difficult to achieve. So I guess I'd want to open up with that question, and we're going to go from my left across the panel. We're going to start with Gijs, and I want to pose that question to you, Gijs. In your opinion, where should the burden of strategic decision-making and planning around social business take place in the modern-day corporation?
Okay, so what we're seeing in the enterprises that we're engaging with in South Africa is that Don's view is absolutely correct. It needs to have an adoption and a clear focus from C-suite or executives, which that focus is then built into a strategy which is then tiered down into the rest of the enterprise. If you don't have that buy-in from the top, it's just not going to work. It's as simple as that.
So now, Craig, you're at the coalface. You're in the middle of the beast. In Nedbank, where does it lie, and is that where you think it should lie?
Some people think it lies with Steve, but it's not us. So, short answer to that, from my experience, and it's not where it should be, but short answer to that is everyone. It takes an entire company to take the company onto social business. And yes, it takes an initiation from the top, from the executives. It takes a buy-in from them. But you know what? Some executives just aren't wired to be socially active. But that doesn't mean that they don't need to support it.
Sure.
But it really is a consolidated effort from everybody getting involved, and that's never going to happen. It's a utopian situation. But what we found is that the more you teach, the more you onboard. And that's a massive thing.
And I guess that's the key answer to the next question I wanted to ask, because I guess the question revolves around strategic decision making, and then there's a question of whether or not everybody in our organization is mandated or supported from that perspective, and that's a very idealistic viewpoint. Yeah. But Mark, your opinion?
Yeah, I think in Kenya, like I said, one of the challenges that people are, really obsessing about social media at the moment. But like I said, if you do actually work out some of the numbers, it actually says it's tough without giving some context. But I'd say for Kenya at the moment, we have a very particular struggle. So I definitely agree that in terms of who owns it and where it sits, it needs to sit as high as possible. And certainly with some of the more progressive leadership we've seen in Kenya, it has to be, and certainly in East Africa, it's the leaders who've gone above and beyond the others to educate and inculcate it in themselves, to understand it and to participate. And many have made mistakes along the way, but that's how you see progress and this idea of being open to learning. And that certainly filters down.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that just now as well. We're going to talk about the elements, I think, of culture that need to drive, because ideally we can prescribe platforms, we can prescribe policies, but we need cultural elements to support it. So, Dion, your opinion, we know on which side of this story you sit, but in your opinion, who owns social decision-making in the corporation?
Well, that is the number one question that I get right now is who should be in charge of social, right? And that person presumably would make strategic decisions, if it is indeed one person. And we definitely see that organizations are trying to figure out where it belongs in the organization. Does it belong in marketing and customer care and the IT department? Half the organizations in our Social Business Council, social business is an IT-led activity, right? So they're making strategic decisions for the business, but they don't really necessarily know very much about it. And so right now we see the leading entity, we see organizations create at first a social media committee, and that kind of makes some of the strategic decisions at first. And then they create, for lack of a better word, that's not my favorite phrase at all, is a social business center of excellence. We're going to talk about that in the workshop later. That seems to be the place where organizations are kind of creating a strategic capability and viewing it with budget and decision-making power. But I agree with Mark. It's the person whoever is actually making the strategic decisions and making them stick. That's where it happens.
I want to park that point that you made around it being an IT-owned decision, because that's an interesting dynamic for me, because I think one of the legacies around CIOs and CTOs, based I think on some decisions that were made around big software purchases in the 90s and the 80s, is that the job description for that individual today has become damage control, not necessarily innovation. So our most innovative opportunities lie with our most paranoid person.
Exactly.
It's an interesting thought. Now, Lucy, you've both been within the corporation and consulted to corporations, and you, I guess, would have a potentially legal bias to this point, but from a risk perspective, I mean, that's a big question that we haven't, we're talking about the opportunities, we're not talking about risk. Considering the risks involved in social business engagement, both internally and externally, where should it sit?
Well, it's an interesting question, but I think possibly the accountability and definitely the endorsement needs to sit at top management. But I think this concept of a center of excellence is possibly the most user-friendly way to ensure that your organization engages on a social perspective. But I think the key for being successful is to have a strategy that is set from the top down, that everybody understands, the whole organization understands. So a simple strategy around what is our social plan, our presence, our strategy, our participation in the market from a social perspective, that every tier of management, right down to the bottom level of employee, can understand and participate at all levels. So to reiterate, I think the endorsement and accountability must sit at the top, but it needs to flow down and everybody needs to be engaged and understand what the company strategy is.
So I'm sure you have questions parked from the earlier sessions. You're welcome to ask those at this point. So if you do have a question, please put your hand up. Somebody will throw something at me and I'll know that you do want to ask that question. But I want to pose a question based on what you've just said. So Dan, I saw an announcement this morning that Ogilvy have appointed a chief data officer. And obviously now there's a big PR push around it and so on. Are there executive level job descriptions that haven't existed before that you think are becoming a necessity on the back of some of these trends?
Well, the question is, do we need a chief community officer, a chief digital officer? These are questions that are actively being asked right now. Certainly the chief customer officer is a role that is fast growing. 25% of large companies now have one. That's up from almost nothing 2 years ago. And that just shows the importance that engagement is now getting. It's now a C-suite level activity. Are we getting maybe too many C-suite offices? Perhaps, but the challenge we really have is digital is transforming everything we do in businesses. It hasn't had the right or enough representation. The CIO and the CMO are probably doing more with digital than any other part of the organization, but they're basically siloed activities.
So, Craig, would you agree that social is changing everything about business? Or is that just, I mean, we're a room of socially enthusiastic people. Are we blowing our own horn, or is that true? I mean, you're in the business. Is that what you're experiencing?
I mean, one of the things coming in from, one of the things at any bank, I think, or any major organization is death by PowerPoint and death by pack. Everybody talks about, we'll put it in a pack and it'll come to reality. One of the things we've learned is the only way to strategize in social media is to operationalize, because you've got to learn as you go. There's no defined strategy that's going to take you to any of these slides and become one of the 10 top brands in social media. It's literally about learning as you go. And I think the key thing that we learned as regards strategy and the way things need to change is you've got to teach the top brass that change is okay, and that it doesn't need to be in a pack for it to happen. It doesn't need to be in a PowerPoint for it to happen. It's going to happen anyway. And one of the key critical turning points, certainly at Nedbank, was for us to realize that the conversation about our brand is happening, whether we are participating or not. It's happening already. People are talking about our brand. People are talking about our organization. We can either choose to participate and take that risk, pack or no pack, or we can actually just kind of sit back and let it implode.
But I think our conversation now is still revolved very much around how the brand engages with its customers, and I guess you have the luxury of having a team that's dedicated to that. But Kees, I mean, there is a mutiny on the bounty. There's an uprising of socially aware, connected, knowledgeable staff. In Cerebra, we call them 89ers, people that are entering the business place at the moment. They don't know a world that isn't digital, social, connected, and enabled. So how does a business with hundreds of years of industrial age legacy cater for an information age employee?
So it's a good question. I think the methodology before deploying social business software within the enterprise is to follow on what Craig said, is to make the C-suite guys comfortable that this is a change and that it's real. And the fact is, if you don't embrace the Generation Y generation and later within your enterprise, these are typically people, if you don't keep them engaged, they're going to go somewhere else. Yeah. And they've got tremendous competence, they've got tremendous innovative capacity, and they're highly collaborative in the way that they approach issues within the business. So if you can structure the methodology correctly around how you're going to identify certain pain points within the business that then satisfies the PAC and satisfies the ROI to some extent, I think you've got a great foundation to start the business building around the social business.
But we're still talking about what you do when you have the luxury of prescribing a solution to the business. Now, Lucy, I mean, one of our clients the other day phoned us up in a panic and said, our employee has installed a social collaborative suite, or at least sent out invitations to thousands of employees, and there's like thousands of them now online, and they're chatting about work, and how do we control this, can we shut it down? So we're assuming that we can plan for, prescribe, but what happens when the employee makes the change themselves? What happens when it's driven from the bottom up? I mean, how does business control or cater for that, or can you at all?
Look, it's difficult to control. You can cater for it, certainly, and I think, again, having a strategy is key. And if it is being pushed from the bottom up, is to engage what's being pushed from the bottom up and say, okay, so this is what our employees are doing. Let's not put a stop to it unless we want to remain in the dark ages and lose maybe some of our top talent. Let's engage it and say, let's try and put some governance or frameworks around how these tools are being utilized. Put policies in place, communicate with the staff, say, you know, we encourage you to do X, Y, and Z within the limitations. Please read the policies and just make sure that the engagement is kind of monitored, and that people are aware that what they say and what they're doing is possibly going to have impacts, will definitely have impacts on themselves and possibly also on the organization for which they're employed.
We've actually noticed that it's a risk not to have employees that are ready and know how to color inside the lines when you have a social media crisis. And you don't have anybody to put on deck to start dealing with it and getting your side of the story out because you've locked it all down and you've never given any guidelines to workers or enabled any of them. And we're now tracking a number of pretty concrete stories that show that not having a significant number of people ready to go for your side of the company, your side of the story, whatever it is
that's mobilized
it's a risk
not to you're talking about. So Mark, the companies, because you consult to both multinationals and very local businesses, do you see the same priority around social as a trend being reflected within those businesses, as you do externally in the marketing capacity?
Well, definitely. I think what's there is they're smitten by the idea. So, and especially in Kenya, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. In 2011, there was a bit of research that came out that made a point that tried to compel people to think that it was South Africa #1, Kenya #2, and Nigeria #3. It couldn't be at that point. It couldn't have been further from the truth. But it gave us the impression and quite worked in the opposite way, because then people said, well, this is us and this is who we are, and so a lot more businesses began to engage. The media certainly has incorporated it as a part of every news bulletin, every briefing. And so if you're a business decision maker, you cannot escape getting Twitter at least 3 to 4 times a day. It's in the newspapers nowadays. They have leads and actual bits of the paper that are crafted and pulled from Twitter and so on. So I think when you have business decision makers like that being so persuaded towards this potential that social media has, a lot of them engage, a lot of them actually pay, but the results and how long of a commitment it is never apparent at first. And that's where I think a lot of the initiatives that are there are kind of loose schemes. So whether it was marketing or IT, by the time it's coming around and you haven't met your ambitious KPI and it's next year and you're doing an actual review and your neck is on the line, that's the time you want to see other people actually show up. You want this idea of a center of excellence where it's shared responsibility as opposed to being pigeonholed. And at the moment, we're just not fully seeing that yet, but we are seeing some, like a whole lot of great promise, which it's just a matter of the timeline, I think, and the ebbs and flows, the peaks and valleys.
So Craig, we're all talking about strategy, how important strategy is, and that word's come up a couple of times, and I know because we try and sell that a lot to clients. How much does that strategy really matter when it comes to managing communities on a day-to-day basis in real time?
So before I answer the question, I just wanted to jump on. I think a lot of the time when it comes to social media, we're all chasing that Coca-Cola vending machine moment. We've all seen the Coca-Cola vending machine social media clip on YouTube, how they've done. We're all chasing that Coca-Cola vending machine moment. And one of the things we've learned with anything, whether it's a strategy, just get the basics right. Respond to clients quickly. Talk to them in a language that they're talking. Respond on the channel they want to spot. Get the basics right. Get some folk trained up on how to.
Those don't sound like social media principles. Those sound like good business principles.
And that's what I wanted to go. You know what? One of your guys was in our office one day, and he turned around and said, "You know what? Answer that person like you were standing talking to them as if you were at the bar." And that's what it is. Social media is a bunch of people standing around having a chat, and there's nothing new. As regards how you need to use this channel. It's just get the basics right. The Coca-Cola vending machine moments will come. But I think what scares a lot of the executives off is, number one, this insane amount of emphasis on strategy, whereas it should really just be about setting the general themes of how we need to do it and then taking one step at a time with those general themes. So the general theme at Nedbank, for example, was, hey guys, we've got this group of people that are going to be looking after social media. Just hands off for a minute. Let's get them established. And slowly what we've done is we've grown that out. Now we're launching social media ambassadors. We're launching elements of social banking. And slowly but surely we've grown that out in the organization.
To define an enormous strategy for a game that changes on
physically impossible. So just get the basics right. Start simple. Start simply. Have some basic policies in place that will allow you to have those difficult conversations with staff members. When you get a staff member in a call center swearing at customers and saying that they hate their effing job, and that's one thing about social media, you learn how to combine swear words. It's like a whole, I think my mother has been sworn at more than any other person on the face of the planet. And it's strange, people from the Cape seem to know how to put swear words together in a very articulate way. But it doesn't matter who, what, where, is if you've got those basic strategies in place, basic catch moments, and then you've got to have somebody who understands the bigger picture, sitting behind, driving that team. Got to have that one person.
And I guess the next challenge is down to say this: you can have the basics right, but the danger is that the basics come right with a very small team of people, and that it doesn't scale when you really start to.
Don't white knuckle that. And I see this quite a lot. I mean, I also speak into other organizations as well, other than Nedbank. You get this little elite team, and because they're such an elite team, nobody really knows their world. Nobody really worries about their world. They start to white knuckle it because it gives them prestige in an organization for fundamentally, doing what all humans do, and that's talk. And so, for me, it's let that grow, let it go, let those fundamentals sit well, and then let it grow out to the rest of the organization.
Are there any questions from the audience potentially? Insights to any of our speakers specifically that you'd like them to elaborate on a point that's been covered already? Not at the moment. So I want to ask something. Mark, I'm confused. So Twitter is Twitter is, for all intents and purposes, a geographically agnostic platform. And yet one of the things that came through really strongly in our research and in our day-to-day experience of dealing with different customers is that as much as it's a geographically agnostic platform, different markets and different cultural nuances still come through incredibly strongly. So South African Twitter users tend to have a very specific way of using the platform. Kenyan users have a slightly different way. American users, and I'm generalizing in a great deal, but I do see big cultural drivers coming through. What is that? What is there a lesson in there for brands? And what is that lesson?
I think the lesson. So I totally agree with you, and I think like in Kenya, if you look at Twitter as far back as 2008, 2009, about that time, which is I got involved about just earlier about that time thereabouts. We didn't have this. There's something that I've seen with the larger markets where technology has penetrated a lot more, where you see a natural rise of so people who regularly have quote unquote airtime, right? So celebrities, music DJs, just different members of society would, in all intents and purposes, even in traditional media, still get coverage. Those people tend to dominate over time online. Now in Kenya, it kind of worked in reverse because in the beginning it was just people who were, I guess, curious or saw something or had way too much time on their hands. And so the elite, so to speak, now sometimes have no ties to any of these other areas. And so because they're so responsible for shaping the entire conversation, one of the biggest things that irks, I guess, a lot of Kenyans at the moment is social media hate speech and this discussion about how it's taken it to a new level for even people who previously had not the greatest ethnic ties and had not that much to say in the beginning. So I think now if you're a brand and you're studying that, there is no crystal ball to look at. Sometimes there's things where, I guess for South Africa it might mirror or contradict something that happened in the US, but for Kenya, for Nigeria, it's you're not flying by the seat of your pants, but by in quite a strong way, you do need to archive so much of what you see and record it, because either history will repeat itself or you'll actually be the wisest person for having recorded what you see as a pattern.
So Diane, if it's true then, based on what you were saying and some of the conversations that have come through since, that this era of business tends to expose dramatically the inner complexity of many of our sort of more traditional industrial age corporation style businesses. How then are businesses scaling consistency across multiple regions, or is a single brand voice even a possibility at all? Is it okay for Coke to have an identity in the States that's dramatically different from a brand voice perspective in, let's say, Kenya or China, or is that okay? And if so, how do you execute on that?
So we see that that large global organizations have some at least loose coordination across their different brands. So they might represent them very differently regionally. They certainly coordinate quite a bit. So the home office typically has an overall social media strategy, overall brand strategy, and of course then the different regions are able to have some freedom to move within those constraints. We're not seeing that as necessarily a big problem. If there's really a challenge is that, as you say, as you open up all these organizations, you can see everything. It's just the sheer complexity that you inadvertently expose to the public, right, and the risk of confusing them. And keeping your messages simple, I think, and the process is simple, makes that work.
You've mentioned two documents there, brand strategy and a social media strategy. But if a brand is what people say your company is, so in other words, if a brand is really what my friends tell their friends a brand is, then surely those are the same thing? So
we might accept that view here at this event, but I think a lot of marketers don't really believe that deep down, right? Where it really matters, that their customers are now in control of the brand. They have a much louder voice collectively. They're saying much more, right? So much more content is out there from your customers than what you're putting out through all your marketing messages. So I think almost everything we're talking about here is really mindset, and the challenge that we have. We're trying to develop strategies that we're trying to execute on, but we're trying to fight a culture that has grown up under a different set of preconceptions. And my friend Sandy Carter from IBM, she loves to say, culture eats strategy for lunch, and that's really the core issue here.
Okay, so then, Chris, I want to ask you, if that's true, can a technology change a culture, or does the technology have to be chosen to suit a culture?
I think the technology needs to be chosen to suit the culture.
Okay, so you can't think of an example where a technology has changed the culture? Internally in business, social collaboration.
I think with some of the enterprises that we've been in, Protea Hotels, for an example, is probably the antithesis of that. I think the adoption of a social business software platform in Protea is changing how these guys actually do business. But I think primarily, as we said right from the beginning, if there isn't this will and this drive and this passion to actually change how you work, whatever technology you adopt isn't going to make any difference.
There's a few good examples, like email and mobile devices are probably the two biggest ones in terms of what we've seen technology that actually has changed most businesses. But by and large, I agree with you.
So what process do you go through to then evaluate the culture of a business? How do you measure the temperature of readiness for a social collaborative, or any technology for that matter?
So we talk about age. If I walk into a meeting and I'm presenting to a guy that's in his 60s or 70s, I've got a problem. If the guys are younger, Generation Y, Generation X, and baby boomers, certainly much easier. But what we try and gauge is the level of trust in the enterprise. If you've got a low level of trust and it's evident that there's a very dictatorial, hierarchical kind of setup, it's going to be difficult. And we measure that. We interview people and we then say, right, tell us about this business, and we do it on an individual basis or on a group basis. And once we start getting that feedback, we can start engaging where we believe them to be ready. And to be frank, there have been some businesses that we've gone into and we've just said, look, we're actually going to be wasting our time here, so we've actually not engaged.
Well, we have a question at the back, is that correct?
Cool, thanks.
Yes.
My question is just for pretty much the whole panel, but when you have a global brand that has a culture that is possibly dictated out of a headquarters, say, in Europe or in Japan or wherever it might be, but you have a local office or a local, obviously the local guys who definitely see the need and have the need for this social business transformation to take place, but the dictation of the culture is from another area and another region. How do you work around that, and you know, what are the steps to sort of take to overcome that barrier?
Ryan, you'd be best placed to answer that.
Well, I can always, instead of asking for permission, you always ask for forgiveness, right? And we see that strategy working particularly well, but so there is this real chilling effect if you have the home office that doesn't support social media. That you've got your work cut out for you, and you not only do you have to manage upward then and start developing a strategy, you do have to demonstrate that you can produce some value with it. And I can give you a lot of credit to manage upward and get more permission, more resources to do that. But I mean, yeah, you're in a really tough situation if that's where you are, I think.
Craig, do you want to add something?
I think, John, to your question though, is on a local level you've got exactly the same problem. You've got a head office with multiple branches, multiple staff out there. So even on a local level, you're gonna battle with brand management and containment. And one of the questions or one of the comments is around your staff policy or your internal management of that. I think could relate on a national, local, international, doesn't make a difference. And what we've done is we've made sure that at the basis of our employment contract, we stipulate the key things. So we wouldn't ever bring our brand into disrepute. We wouldn't ever bring our superiors into disrepute. We wouldn't ever bring any of our colleagues into disrepute. Whether that's on telephone,
Twitter, right?
radio, what happens in NetBank stage on Twitter, Facebook. But the concept of it is that if you have a culture of people who understand the value of your brand, that's the culture you're trying to breed. Whether that's international, another office, home office, on a local, international, you've got to breed a culture of your staff really appreciating and wanting to contribute and build brand perception, client services, whatever it is. And then you've got to let them run with it.
So on the topic of guidance then, because I mean this is a point I pick up on the workshop later, I talk about extraordinary power, zero guidelines. So there's disproportionately powerful platforms, but we've got very few guidelines. Now that's your space, Lucy, so you're really good at defining the guidelines. And we saw from the report that a high proportion of really great companies have social media policies. Do you think the same proportion is reflected in the understanding of those policies by employees?
No, definitely not. What I have seen, and also from being in-house and also from consulting to various corporations, is that the policy is often drafted in very legalistic terms or very dictatorial terms, and employees are handed a whole bunch of policies when they when they first get employment at the corporation. They maybe browse or just scan through it. They don't really understand all the policies. They haven't possibly even read all the policies. They've acknowledged that they have, and then they go about their business. And I don't think there's any engagement with employees on a regular basis to kind of say, this is what our brand is about, this is what our strategy is about, this is what you should be doing to get out there, this is what you shouldn't be doing, and
so
kind of educating people about the risks.
On a practical level, on a practical level then, have you seen companies that are more innovatively or more progressively communicating the statutes of those policies to their staff and their constituents, and how are they doing that?
Yes, absolutely. So I've seen in some of the corporations where they're doing little online videos where the employees have to actually take this online questionnaire test or whatever it is, and that it's interactive type of thing. It's fun to watch. It's short. It's kind of engaging, and the employees have to sit at their workspace, watch this little video, and take it in. That, I think, is gaining momentum, and people are getting to understand the concepts and getting to understand what the strategy or the principles of the business are, and also just to advertise within your business around things that are of particular importance to your brand. So if there's charities or drives or any social kind of engagement that your company kind of lives for or thrives on, is to educate the employees and say, we're interested
We
in
think
this,
about
and
how we
this is why.
communicate that to the market very well. We don't often think about how we communicate to the internal customer. Case, you wanted to
Yeah, I
say?
just wanted to add, I think the view is, and certainly we've spoken about it before, when you have a bottom-up approach and the thing goes viral, we've seen this in businesses that this has happened in South Africa, that it becomes incredibly difficult to control. It becomes almost impossible to then say, this is now an internal Facebook, now how do we make this a business practice platform? To the extent that a lot of these enterprises, and I'm talking Fortune 100 companies in South Africa, have actually banned it. We've re-engaged because our process is top-down. We say, right, let's try and see what kind of purpose we can develop and how do we emulate this purpose throughout your enterprise so that when it goes live, people have been trained inside the business, but secondly, that there's a purpose driven around what this platform is there to achieve in certain spaces of time, so short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies. But it's absolutely important that those purposes and that social business framework is actually developed prior to going live.
Craig, talk to us about how that comes to life at Nedbank. Does that happen internally in Nedbank? Are people collaborating effectively using technology, or is it very haphazard and mishmash? Or do you not want to divulge how mishmash it is?
Oh, it's great.
In the bank, where I invest my money.
Working really well. Best in the country. I think what added to this whole thing in our space is banking legislature in this country, which is it's a very unique space. It's a very different space. Customer protection of information is very important to us, and so there's risks of cloud technology because we can't take your details and put it onto a cloud that we don't own. That's not legally right for us to do. So we've got that whole caveat. But I think in general.
But then again, you're building your brand on the internet, which you don't own.
Correct. So but your banking details aren't on the internet. So
Yet.
I was going to say yet. I was waiting for you to say it. But I think the principle is that you've got to look at it and say, how am I making this fun for the staff? And not being this top-down autocratic, no, you can't say. And we had to go, to talk into the Nedbank capacity, we had to go back to the beginning and regroup everything, get policemen-like around what was out there, shut sites down. We had hundreds of different Facebook and Twitter accounts that were created.
Okay, but you're talking externally. I'm interested in how it takes life into, behind the corporate firewall, how are staff engaging with
that's what I'm going, and all of those multiple presences were created by staff.
Okay.
So we had to kind of educate them, well, it's not healthy for our brand to be there, then regroup, and then slowly but surely release the animal. And so in the next couple of days, for example, Nedbank internally we've always had LinkedIn running that's open to all staff. We're switching Yammer on, so that what we can do is we're going to use those internal platforms like Yammer to start teaching staff through their engagement on this platform how to be more focused. We will. But I think it's vital for staff to understand that there is a danger, there is a risk, and I'm talking now from a banking perspective with that caveat of the legislation. There is a risk, and unfortunately there has to be some control. But it certainly doesn't have to be in an autocratic way that dictates what they can and cannot say.
Mark, would you advocate to your clients that their employees speak and engage on behalf of the brand with customers online?
I would say it's not as straightforward as a yes or no answer, only because, kind of like you said before, you've got to measure the temperature and a number of kind of key things first before kind of arriving at that conclusion. So I feel you discover more by walking them through the process to arrive at the conclusion, almost more than even the answer itself.
Yeah.
Like, because you can make a series of recommendations and make a very informed no, but that series of recommendations are what essentially will drive the business to reconsider its position, and hopefully by the time you revisit it and work through that process again a few months later, or keep them kind of pursuing the right, a set of questions for a few quarters or a year, contemplate them. I mean, not everybody's got the luxury to do that in the first place, but it should bring them to a point where the answer should be yes in certain situations. A lot of times, because even in Kenya now, there's the expectation is, we know this has always been an otherwise faceless brand, but even something like I forget what what the tags are called. Why don't you put your, there's this sign and the initials of the representative speaking.
Oh, yeah.
That
I don't know what
actually,
that tag's called either. We call it a cuppy. I don't know what that thing.
yeah, it's got a name. Got it from like Code Tweet or something, but I don't remember it. But that, even just watching that and watching some of the decisions and questions that have been made as a result of that, to what extent do you put these people, like I said, they had faces at one time. Safaricom doesn't now, but initials are still there. Some measure of personality is stretched out because that's taking engagement a step further. So I think it's more possibly more about the process, but it should be a hopeful outcome at least.
Right. We've got a question over there, Andile, and then we'll come over there for Musa. Andile, do you want to ask? And then we'll be able to hear you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have a question about if there's a line in the sand between having conversation for the sake of conversation, a la, guys on the bride, and conversation for the sake of hopefully converting. That will hopefully, convert into business.
Are you saying when is it okay to sell?
Yeah, like I don't know. Sometimes I'm very chatty online, for example, and the brands I'd like to talk to, like a guy. I know that's a stupid.
You're a guy.
Exactly. No, like I don't want to talk to them like a brand. I'd like to speak to.
You want to speak to a human?
I want to speak to a human being, but perhaps on the back end of those businesses, it's not part of what their mandate is in terms of communicating with people. I want to know from a business point of view, what's a healthy line in the sand between just having conversation for the sake of conversation and having conversation with the express intent of converting it into business.
Craig, do you want to get that one?
So I think number one is when we look for people to have those conversations with our clients, is I'm not looking for somebody who knows our products really well. I'm looking for somebody who's got some really good general knowledge, who can talk about things, who can engage with people, the old adage, people buy from people they like. And so what we try and do is yes, we've got our proactive marketing material that goes out, our marketing announcement type stuff that goes out on our channels. But one of the things we've hammered home is, are you ready to have the lifestyle or the good general knowledge type conversations that happen around that? So I'm not just talking about the new savings account for my kids. It's called Nedbank for me, and you can get it on I'm not talking about just having conversation with moms around savings accounts for their kids. Have I got someone in my team that can have conversations with moms? Because they're going to buy from people they like. And we've got to be able to build a team that can have conversations that will naturally lead to sales, as opposed to forced sales. When we try to force stuff on social media, never works. People repel, they find other issues why you shouldn't buy that product. They have, you talk as a brand, you get battered as a brand. Talk as a human, and people will be attracted to you.
Musa, are you happy that was answered? Are you there? Cool.
Yeah, just a quick question from my side, because it's something I've been toying around with my head, relating to the use of policies and the use of your contractual obligation to a staff member up front when they get employed, about the do's and the don'ts. And those are fairly kind of historic and autocratic ways of trying to manage behavior. And there's a saying that says, if you show me how you measure me, I'll then show you how I'll behave. So is there any value, and has there been any experience as far as integrating into your KPIs and into the measures that are frequently looked at, the metrics that drive the actual behaviors that benefit organizations from a social perspective?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think to build what you want from your workforce into each individual's KPI is essential. But I have found that policies that are more loosely worded, so not very dictatorial, not very legalistic, people don't read those, people don't understand those, but a policy that kind of talks to the culture of the organization and the culture that you're trying to breed, that's easy to read and short and succinct, is still quite successful, provided that it's communicated. It's not just given to the employees in a pack and they put it underneath their bed and never look at it again. But I think it's essential that the key the culture that you're trying to breed in your business should be built into every individual's KPIs, because then you're going to get the best, and people are going to understand what you're wanting from them. Absolutely.
So I'm not
But most HR departments are not doing that today. They're not rolling that data up. And we do see there's a tension between too long a policy and no one knows what they can and can't do, and it has a chilling effect. Too short a policy, like Deloitte famously has now a 3-word social media policy.
Yeah.
You know, that's probably that's
That don't be
perhaps
stupid,
too-
or-
yeah, right. Essentially, the boils down to
Or be nice.
yeah. But so yeah, what we're seeing now is organizations, particularly like financial institutions, are concerned because one mistake, one inadvertent release of customer information can have a devastating effect. And so employees are afraid they might do something wrong. So there's now emerging, we see on the leading edge, is safety nets that allow tweets and other things to be put in escrow briefly and flagged if they look like they're releasing information that shouldn't be released. And that way employees feel like they have some training wheels on and not going to do something wrong. But that's at the cutting edge. Most folks are basically issuing policy, not measuring very much, and being very informal about it.
So the day I met Rex, we had a discussion about this because on the very same topic, one of our clients was asking for ways to measure internal collaboration, and we spoke about which is now a big feature on WiseTalk, so a point system that measures collaboration, so you can allocate points on the platform to specific behaviors. And I quite like that. It's very measurable, and sometimes it's behind the scenes. People aren't even aware of that metric behind collaboration. So, you know, if your content gets supported by X amount of people in a certain way, it almost counts for sort of like vitality for collaboration in businesses. And that I think is becoming a very powerful tool. And if you plug that into, you know, come salary review / KPI time, those measurements are incredibly useful, and I think make perfect sense. Are you a constructive contributor to the culture and, you know, collaboration within this business? I think that's a great thing to measure. It's a very soft issue, but technology provides us with solutions that allow us to measure those soft issues, so it's not necessarily a challenge anymore. Are there any other questions from the audience? That's you. Yeah, great.
I wanted to ask how far along the line of getting employees to use social for business purposes and involving in the process? At what point are they going to start going, it's no longer fun and looking for something else?
Okay, I'll answer that. I think the one thing one has to remember is if you are wanting to engage the younger generations, you need to have some element of social in it. So when you're going around stipulating your policy, allow some element of social grouping. Cycling clubs, trail running clubs, eating out clubs. Obviously, getting hammered on a Friday night club won't really count. But if you allow that kind of, if you allow that to happen and have it in a way that it's okay, you know, then you've got to have that to keep the guys engaged. I think a question around, you know, how conversations happen in well thought out social business formulations inside business is that they self-moderate. You know, you're not, if the conversation is generally around, we're going cycling on Friday, does anyone come and join us, or you've got a business focus, when the guy posts, scattered 14 kittens last night, you're going to think, well, that's not really appropriate for this community. You know, so, and then you can choose to unfollow those people or whatever the rules, whatever you want to do. But the reality is that we certainly find if we've done our jobs right, the community self-moderates, it has an element of social, but it has a heavy weighting towards business practice.
So to do on as well is what we're finding now, because we're moving into that space now, where we slowly kind of, we've white-knuckled, we've kept it to a small team, and now we want to release it and start having ambassadors. And what we've done in our initial kind of ambassador type program is that we've given topics that people would be talking about normally to the people that are talking about it within our organization. So we've got a guy he's sold out on innovation in the bank, but he's sold out in innovation. He's a gadget junkie. And so we've asked him to come along and be our ambassador around what we're doing within NetBank around innovation. He loves that, and he's talking about it anyway. And so that it keeps his excitement levels up, and it's not going to go off course because we know that he's always going to be talking about those general things. So it's very important that you choose the right people to choose, or choose the right people to talk about the subject matter that excites them, but is also beneficial for your brand and for your presence.
Lucy, Craig and them are making spokespeople in the bank, basically.
Yes.
Are you nervous about that?
Yes. From a legal perspective, of course. But I think
That's why we've engaged you guys
Yes.
to advise us.
but I think the best thing to do, and to coin Craig's phrase of the white knuckle approach, is to be informed. It's very, very important to be informed. You need to know what your employees are saying. You need to know who is interested in what they're doing, and you need to have plans to engage the people that are doing things that are not desirable, or even as well as the things that are desirable, so that you can groom that and kind of weed out the not so desirable things. And I think from a legal perspective, from a governance perspective, the biggest thing, the most important thing is to be informed and to just know what's going on being said.
It comes back to listening though, Mike, is that 90% of what we do in the social media center at Nedbank is we actually not typing, we're not tweeting, we're just sitting listening, we're just sitting watching what's going on, we're listening to our clients, we're listening to what the staff are saying. Sometimes we don't even know if it's a staff member, but just by the fact that, well, some of them are stupid, they actually tweet out their staff number. You know, we don't literally always need to hammer. It's about listening, being informed, and monitoring and watching. And then creating a space where even when a staff member does perhaps tweet out something incorrectly or post on their Facebook wall something incorrect, that we've got a team that can come alongside them and educate them as regards why that was such a bad thing to do.
Cool. So at a practical level, Dan, we've spoken a lot about strategies, we've spoken a lot about policies, we've spoken a lot about educating staff, stakeholders, partners, even customers. Where can we, on a practical level, find the best practice for us? Where can we find great examples of social media policies that have worked? Where can we find strategies or templates for strategies that we can work with? Is that documentation, is that intelligence available online, or do people have to pay people like Cerebra and Dutchess Group money?
Well, like Mark was saying earlier, it's early days for social. Right? We're at the very, very beginning, the infancy, and I think you can't even really say we have best practices. And I'd even say that, you know, if you look at best practices, they're different by industry and by company culture and so on. So if you have a real challenge there isn't a lot of really good documentation because the story is changing so much, right? I mean, social media is a very different beast than it was just 3 years ago, let's say, right? Just to pull a time window out of the air. So you can, for policy is one of the first things people worked on way back in the day. So you go to, I think, Chris Boudreau probably has the best overall site that has it.
Chris Woodrow.
Boudreau. I think it's socialmediacompliance.org. It's easy to find on type in social media policies. The first thing that comes up in Google. It has a database of very effective policies. Companies that wanted to publicize and contribute them. It's the world's largest database. From a policy standpoint, we're okay. The challenge is more on the strategy side because there is so much variability. Like, you know, are you doing inside? Are you doing outside? What industry are you in? What's your emphasis? You know, what business function are you working on? Or are you a regional firm? Are you a global firm? Your strategies are going to vary a great deal, and so we're still learning where the points of variability are. But I do think that there's enough out there now that you can kind of cherry pick from what has worked before. There's starting to be a better database of case studies. But yeah, strategists have their work cut out for them. They have to understand their company, they have to understand the technology and the culture. And then they have to figure out, you know, what are the right steps to get there. And the part where I don't see companies, most companies are not willing to make very many mistakes. It takes them a long time to make a decision and then go and do something. So strategists, you know, we saw in the studies earlier, you have to take 2, 3, or 4, or 5 years. You have to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, experimentation is not necessarily an industrial age mindset, is it?
No.
There's a question over there.
I just want to know, in your opinion, are companies embedding innovation as a core building block of their culture early enough to be able to then adapt with new technologies and social business that it best suits them? I know they said we start working and we build as we go, but ideally, what's your thoughts on it?
So I'll just jump in real quick. So we try to do a study to understand what companies would naturally adopt social business or innovation in general. And one of the folks who worked first for a while, Dave Gray, the famous visual thinker, he came up with the following research. He noticed that the companies that have survived the ages, you know, the world's oldest corporations, almost universally had one common trait, in that they didn't wait for the world to go do something and have it imposed on them from the outside. They actively went out as a core part of their culture and sought out the new things and tried to make them work for them. And these are the companies that have survived all the world wars and changes in society and multiple revolutions from the information age to the industrial age, and they're still around. And at their core, they highly prize innovation and adapting to the world's faster than everybody else.
Okay, Gijs, you might want to speak to that because I know your research is
Yeah,
based
so I actually wrote my master's thesis on this topic. So I think that the view really is, and I couldn't emulate more what Dion has said, is that organizations typically that have formed a framework around closed innovation, where R&D only happens within a sector of the business, those businesses will fail. I won't tell you when they will fail, but they will fail. Businesses that are adopting what one would call an open innovation paradigm, when there's a high engagement with the entire enterprise, where there's a high engagement with your consumer, where there's a high engagement with suppliers. Those are the organizations that typically are going to reach out and really transform how business gets done. So that's what my research unpacked.
Are there any other questions?
A lot of these examples that we've been chatting about and all the principles, they seem to apply sort of more easily to really large businesses. And we're sort of from like a 12-person organization just trying to get our name out there a bit. How do we, as a small company, sort of become a more social business? I mean, does it mean let's all just get a Twitter account and let's like each other's statuses about the company or whatever? Or how do we engage in a sort of broader audience, being so small ourselves?
Mark, do you have some thoughts around that?
Sure. I think so we've been possibly talking about where I guess it's least likely to come from. So some of the best examples actually do come from smaller businesses that can incorporate it from day one. And so, I mean, even if you look at things that are tying more around business and innovation, things like this idea of a lean startup that says, you're at 12 people now, with the set of consumers you have, you've sold them, you only need to have sold one thing to them once, but you're trying to discover problems, you're trying to discover and find some kind of repeatable business model. It allows you to be a lot more nimble than some of the legacy systems and 60, 70-year-olds that actually dominate some of the boardroom tables. So what I think it says is it's even less about social itself and more about positioning you to where you, as an organization, do a lot more iterations between you and your consumer. So those you've sold to, those you could potentially sell to. And in terms of just trying to incorporate where do they receive a lot of their messaging and communication from, to how are you selling, and then tweaking things at a very small level, seeing success or failure, so failing fast and taking lessons learned, and seeing how you can actually adapt the business itself to move it forward.
But I guess a question to ask even before that, and I think a lot of the corporations that we speak about often feel this is something that Mike was talking about, feel an obligation to be social simply because of the broad range of markets and constituents that they have to speak to. But I think the first question would be, does this make us money? Does being social have a compelling business objective behind it? And if it doesn't, then it could potentially be a waste of time. But that's an important question I have to ask.
We often sit with, Nedbank's all about small business, and we often sit with a lot of small businesses in the social media center, and we invite them to come to say, well, how do we make this work for us? The principles still apply. First of all, is it going to make you money? Is it viable for me to be there? Don't think that you have to be on every single platform because that's what everybody else is doing. Pick the platforms that work for you. And then number two, pick the conversations that work for you. Don't fall into the trap of trying to sell yourself because you're small and you want to grow. Pick the conversations that are going to get people to trust you. Make sure. I was just chatting to a chap. He makes the wet wipes that you use at the trolleys by the Pick and Pays or whatever. He's a small guy. He's got four people in a little factory. They manufacture the stuff, and his business is growing well. And so we launched a little thing for him, kind of saying, where do you think it's most dirty during your day, kind of thing. Where's the most dirtiest place you've touched today, kind of conversation. And you'll be blown away by the
outcomes to that.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was weird, but it was crazy. But I mean, people were telling you, I never ever open the door to a public toilet. I always use my foot to open the. Yeah, and he managed to blow this conversation up, and you will be blown away by the amount of business that he got, because all of a sudden people were talking about the touch screens at the State Kinekor kind of thing, and then State Kinekor got hold of him and said, well, if you've got a product that can help us solve this, and so it went. So pick your platforms and pick your conversations, because you don't have the time as a small business to run around having all of the conversations on all of the platforms. You've still got to grow your business.
We have exactly 5 minutes to lunch. That means 5 minutes for questions. So Kate, do you want to ask, are there any other questions, Mike? So we're going to go Kate, Mike, and then we're going to close off. Okay? So I assume the first part of the question is for Don. No.
Yeah, so we see a lot of companies hire behavioral psychologists and ethnographers to understand why people contribute, because Forrester did this great study a couple years ago saying, well, how many people will help co-create your business? And it was amazing, and the facts are in the book. I think it's 60% of people are willing to co-create. Things like crowdfunding and everything from open source software to online communities and YouTube all works because people are willing to create things for others. But the motivations are many, varied, and complex. Like for the TurboTax example, they found that a lot of tax advisors would answer a lot of the questions as advertising because they have an audience of a lot of people, and they can demonstrate, instead of saying I'm great, they can prove that they're great by answering so many questions. That's their actual leading source. It's really a core of hardcore tax experts that are in there. But you have to understand why people will help contribute to your business, because you're going to want to encourage that. You're going to want to communicate that and reach out to people who are likely to be motivated by whatever those triggers are. So there is, because social business is primarily about human participation and communication, you do have to be an expert to some degree in communication, human communication and participation. And that really helps your efforts. Intuit actually has several full-time behavioral psychologists to optimize things like live community. And so we have to think differently about those solutions.
Lucy, yeah, you've got the question.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of benefit to having an external advocate for your brand. There's more authenticity around what's said sometimes. And I think from a legal perspective, what you have to be careful, whether the person's in-house or external, is to have clear guidelines around what that person is doing for you. Specifically, if they're not part of your company, is to have a very clear and concise contract with that person that says, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and this is what will happen if you do what you're not supposed to. So that you've got some kind of there's legal ramifications for undesirable types of behavior. But I think, there's no less of a threat to have an internal person, because the behavior can still be the same. You just have to have a tight contract in place.
And I suppose some of this is risk reward. It's about saying we see the benefits of social advocacy across our constituents, but there'll be an inherent risk, and it's about deciding whether or not the reward is worth the risk.
Absolutely.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
Is there one more question over there? Mike? Yeah?
My question is really to all of you guys. From my perspective, I've seen how the brand-agency relationship has really been transforming over the years. And there's been a lot of very interesting conversations I've had, a lot of debates on where the role of agency lies in the next 5 to 10 years, especially as more and more companies seem to be bringing social media and indeed marketing in general more and more in-house. Now, it's not to say social media agencies or agencies in general will die off. I don't think they will. But I'd love to hear your insights on how the brand-agency relationship will transform.
Great.
How
will it transform, Craig?
How will it transform? So I got a very simple thing as regards, it's not good to mark your own homework. So I think the agency will become, over the next couple of years, will become the extra set of eyes on what is happening internally. I think with the amount of dialogue that happens, the conversational quality, it's very difficult to outsource that. It's got to be at the heartbeat of the organization. It's one of the reasons why we have set up our social media center so close to our CEO's office, because we want to have that dialogue. Very difficult to get that out. So we still see a very distinct role in the agency, making sure that we keep true to our brand, we keep true to the tonality of what we said we would do, how we speak, how we present ourselves. But as opposed to dictating or controlling that element of the business, that's definitely becoming more of an in-house function. But we still want to leverage off the agency as having an extra set of eyes on what we're doing and holding us true to our brand, our tonality, and all of the rest. Does that answer the question? Cool.
I'd like to add on to that as well. What we at Consilium have seen and been part of a number of conferences where these types of things are being discussed is that there seems to be a move toward what your business is about. So if you're a financial institution or if you're a marketing agency, that must be your key focus. And kind of ancillary functions should, where possible, be outsourced. It's more cost effective, and you get cutting edge kind of top of the line advice, people that are specializing in doing the social media stuff or whatever it is, advising you. They're keeping their eyes on the ball, you keeping your eyes on the ball. So just like with how it's happening in the world with IT, a lot of the IT functions that were previously in-house are now being outsourced because it's just more cost effective, it's more efficient, it's it's just better to kind of perform that way. So from my perspective, I think that it will stay separate to a large degree.
I also think that in as much as a large organization or any organization that uses an agency for that matter needs to kind of keep nimble as regards the conversations they're having, agencies need to do the same too, because it's no longer just about social marketing. It's no longer about having the right timeline image and a great Twitter pic. It's really now about those conversations. So what we're putting a lot of pressure on the agencies in our space to do is when they bring us a campaign, don't just bring us the campaign, bring us conversation starters, bring us what's the segment that we want to talk to? What is that segment wanting to talk about? How do we relate that to the product you're trying to put? And so we're putting a little bit of an extra spin on the agency to say, you need to do a little bit more homework because we need to have conversations about this stuff, not just put out a billboard advert, which is really quite critical. So I think both roles the guys need to kind of work with the fact that we're moving from social marketing to social conversation and dialogue and a community that wants to hear from us and talk to us.
Superb. Thank you, Craig. Thanks, guys. Can we give them a round of applause, please? We now go to lunch. Lunch will be an hour until 1:30. At 1:30, we will go straight to the workshops. Craig's going to give you the details on which workshop is where. Are you? Okay, I'm standing in the way of food, so I'll make this quick. I didn't announce earlier, guys. All the rooms are on the outside there. When you go out, go past the registration desk and they're on the left for the workshops. The workshops are 45 minutes each, and on the itinerary it says it's an hour. It's 45 minutes for the workshop and then 15 minutes to change to the next one. Before we go to lunch, I just want to quickly, we've got the results of the business card draws earlier. So for the Social Business Africa report is Jennifer Singleton. And so, and you guys, you don't have to rush down, you can just come down afterwards. And then, and the Social Business by Design books, which we've got from Diane, thank you very much. The three winners are Barry Tuck, Danny Haddison, and Tess Silliman. Barry, we're going to have to do an audit on that, I think. Just to make sure. Cool, thank you guys.